I was making great money and I was pushing myself and trying to motivate myself into success. But really what I was doing was digging a grave the entire time. And I was so lost and blind to it because the sales society and more or less the culture that's created around sales that was causing me to just kind of blindly continue to dig that grave, and not just dig it, bro, but build my casket.
Welcome to the Modern Selling Podcast, where we help the entire sales community to create more sales conversations with today's modern buyer. This includes anyone from entrepreneurs and business owners to sales reps and sales leaders. Each episode, you will hear from sales leaders, practitioners, and influencers to help you find, engage, connect, and nurture your relationships with your buyers. I'm Mario Martinez Jr., your host, and you're now listening to the Modern Selling Podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Modern Selling Podcast, where I'm with my man, Dale Dupree, the leader of the Sales Rebellion, a friend of mine. I've been watching him and all the stuff that he's doing here. Not only is he the founder of the Sales Rebellion, but he's also the host of another podcast called Selling Local Podcast. So Dale, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks, Mario. It's good to be on, bro.
I'm excited to have you. You've made a very good name for yourself in the industry. I follow you. I enjoy your posts. They're super raw, organic, authentic, down and dirty and down to basics. And so just do me a favor. I talked a little bit about your background as being the founder of the Sales Rebellion, which I just love how you're just getting everybody in your whole fan base around the rebellion. But talk a little bit about your background in sales, where you've been. And I think you're probably most well known for a title, and I hope it's okay for me to give this to you, or it's really off of your LinkedIn profile, but the legendary Copier Warrior.
Yeah.
So I really love that branding. So talk a little bit about your background.
Thanks, man. And real quick, I just want to say for all the listeners, because you were saying that you've been following me, it's really funny. And I don't know if you remember this, but you were the MC for my first speaking engagement ever in 2018. Do you remember that?
Where was that at?
It was at Sanger Bajir from Terminus.
Oh, yeah.
Flip my funnel up in Boston.
Flip my funnel. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, you were the first MC. I did a 10-minute talk. Morgan Ingram, there was a bunch of people that spoke alongside me, right? And you were the MC, and you bring the fire. People that are listening to the podcast, I'm sure they listen because of the energy and the good guests that you have on, right? But they don't understand, if they've never met you in person, they don't understand like how tame you really are on these things, dude. Like you bring the fire when you get on that mic, son. So thanks again for having me on, dude, because this is kind of full circle for me, right? I was with another company when we first met, which goes back to my origins of being the Copier Warrior, right? And my story really starts back in 1984, which was the year my father founded his copier firm. So he went from the big box store, decided that he didn't want to work for the man anymore. And also he was selling paper. I like to say that because everybody loves The Office. So my dad was like Dwight Schrute, like on steroids, right? So he was the number one salesperson for the company that he was working for. And this was back in the 70s when copy machines were like $50,000 and there was two, like not hundreds.
Right, so, exactly.
So he decided that he didn't like the way that leadership and the company was going when it came to the way that they treated their prospects, when it came to the way that they treated their employees. He felt that they were particularly separating the human element. He was telling me that there were sometimes, and instances I should say, where people were calling and telling him that they'd been down for 7 days. Imagine if your copy machine didn't work for 7 days. And this was one of the larger copier firms in the territory. So they were a big organization. They weren't small peas. So he decided to do his own thing. And 1 year later, I was born. So people like to joke that Toner runs in my blood. But I love that saying because it really ties me back into my foundation and also my legacy, which is my father, who's my hero and my best friend. And just to say it real quick before we get into it too much, my father, I lost him to cancer in 2016. And really the journey that I've been on, like the one that is existent today, is an evolution of Dale that comes from loss, and not just loss of a father, but loss of a leader, loss of a man that loved me unconditionally, treated his community like they were his own, right? And set a great example for all of us who were around him, and really feeling this emptiness And not just that cliche version of like, a piece of me left with him, right? Like a whole entire chunk of my life has changed because of that. And so at a certain point in my walk, I actually rebelled pretty hardcore against my father. And I say that because I want everybody that's listening to understand that it's okay to have a past with someone that you love that isn't all, roses and smells real nice, right? There's always going to be some times in our life where we don't have the clarity or judgment, especially at the age that I was at, which was 17, to make the right decisions on things. But what I love about my story is that when I was being a total butthead, my dad was a great leader and a good example to me. He never got pissed off. He never told me you're doing the wrong thing, you're going to fail. He always supported me. So at 17, I decided I didn't want to go to college. Even though I had some scholarships to choose from, I said, screw it. And I got signed to a record label and I hit the road with my band. The first show we played before the tour started in Orlando, I remember I was like hanging off of stuff and going absolutely nuts, right? Because I played a metal band, right? So we were going crazy on stage. And I remember looking out and seeing my mom and my dad at the show. And they didn't even tell me they were coming, right? They just showed up to support me day one before I went and started this journey. And for the next 5 years, bro, I toured the United States.
When you saw mom and dad, though, did you stop? I mean, did it stop you in your tracks? You're like, oh, crap.
If there was anybody watching, they knew that I saw my mom and dad for sure, because it wasn't like I turned pale white or anything. But to be quite frank and extremely vulnerable here, a wave of emotion passed through me because I was having a really fun time and I was like, this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. And then I looked out and I saw two of the most important people in my life staring back at me as a surprise, right? And so I was absolutely overwhelmed with emotion of just happiness that would have been translated also into more of a sadness as well too. Like at that point in my life, especially because I definitely had this feeling deep inside of me that even though it was what I wanted to do, that I was failing my parents, right? And that's just something I had to struggle with at the time, but I came to terms with it and I realized that really my decisions were what they were and they were good for me because I was cultivated through this culture of community and travel and exploring and playing music every night in a different city, in a different town, and the aesthetics behind all those things, the creativity that came along with it, writing music. I mean, it was something that defined me as a salesperson. So when I decided to stop playing music, and there's a long story there, so anybody that wants to hear it, feel free to hit me up, especially if you're an ex-musician, but it involves drugs, it involves addiction. It's not a pretty story, but I'm happy to share it with anybody that ever wants to talk to me about it. And so I decided that I wanted to have a family. I wanted to get away from these things. I didn't want to be in this culture anymore. So I started to part-time go on tour and part-time work for my father. But then he got sick with a staph infection. So that was like literally about 8 months into me working with him for the first time in my career, right? Really, truly working with him. Prior to, when you're a kid, you go to your dad's office when he owns a company, right? Like you break boxes down, you throw stuff away, you clean the windows, you clean the toilets, you learn everything, right? So my dad did culture us when it came to the small business environment. So we knew what he did. We knew how to cut a payroll check even, which is probably not a good thing at 8 years old, right? But when I came back and started selling for him full time, it went from day one to 12 years in the copier industry. And actually it was right at 13 before I left, which was last year, January 4th of last year. So I've only been running the Sales Rebellion since March 20th of 2019. So we're coming up on our 1 year anniversary.
Yeah, you're right. You're right around the corner from the 1 year. So, I mean, you shared a lot of personal details. My question to everybody is tell us something nobody knows about yourself, even if they looked at your social profile. I don't know if that was it, but I mean, that's a great story. Is that it, or is there something more? Do you got another juicy story?
I got skeletons. I got juice.
Okay, well, don't confess on this show.
So one thing that I was super passionate about for a solid, probably about 4 or 5 years of my life was jujitsu. I was going and training in jujitsu because I actually wanted to fight mixed martial arts.
I think you used this in a post, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, and I remember this about you, and I was like, oh, no kidding. He's a jiu-jitsu guy.
I used to get the crap beat out of me doing it, bro. But it was so much fun. But my dad, it was funny because my dad told me one day, he was like, you probably shouldn't go so hard on a Wednesday night and then come in on Thursday with a black eye and like a bruised neck, because your prospects are probably going to think like, who is this dude?
Like I'm just doing a back alley MMA style fighting.
Yeah, right. And it was definitely, it's really funny, Mario, is that I had so many inappropriate jokes. So people would be like, what happened to your face? I'd be like, oh, my girlfriend. And that, that's me. So I was just giving my humor, but I got to learn really quickly, like there is context to everything, right? And there's a time and a place sometimes. trying to build rapport that way is not a good thing, but building rapport prior to making that joke, absolutely okay.
I love it. I love it. Let's get into some meat here and let's talk about sales and something that you're passionate about, something that I'm passionate about. When we were spending some time talking earlier, we were talking about, what's wrong with sales today.
A general statement of what is wrong with sales today is that we still utilize so much from the 1970s. And I just use that date to show, not necessarily because it was things that came out of the 70s, but the fact that we still live like it's 1970 inside of the sales realm, where we look at metrics wrong, we look at the phone incorrectly, we look at cold calling wrong. I mean, there's so much to it, and we still push products instead of trying to connect with people. So it's just nuts to me that we're continuing this trend of something that is so in the past at this point. As a matter of fact, one of the things that I find interesting right now is the way that people are innovating. The way that people are innovating is that traditionally, like AI and technology is taking us even further away from each other. But now people are literally putting these elements of human interaction and emotion and context into their products and into what they're doing to serve communities. And that's the key word, community, is we're creating community again, right? But salespeople are still lost on that front. To them, it's just a quota, it's a commission check, it's a number instead of a human being on the other side. It's products instead of people, and that's the problem, in my opinion.
So first off, I agree with you. So I'm going to say that. But secondly, I don't think it's a salesperson problem. And let's talk about that for a second. I truly believe it is a sales leadership problem. Now, every person who's listened to my podcast and anybody brand new knows that I've spent now 22 years in sales. My last stop before going into and opening up my own individual business, which I had no business being a business owner until I became a business owner. And all of a sudden I was like, I gotta grow a business. I'd never done that, right? And so at the age of 45 and older, that's the marker. Most VPs of sales, most director and VPs are that 45 years and older. It's that age right there at 45 and older that I think the problem exists with. And you talk about, and I want to tease this out. You said that we are still living in the 1970s. We're doing sales as the way they did it in the 1970s. Let's talk about what that means. And then I want to circle back to my very passionate topic on why sales leaders are doing it wrong. And by the way, I'm in that category, right? I'm in that older category because that's the way I grew up selling. So I'm not speaking from I'm a millennial and I'm telling the older people that it's wrong. No, I'm speaking from a voice of, I'm in your category and we are doing it wrong. So why do you think we're doing it wrong? Like, well, what do you mean when you say 1970s? Talk about cold calling, talk about prospecting, or talk about whatever it is that you're thinking.
As a salesperson, we have a set of metrics that we have to hit every day, right? So we look at our day based on a checklist, which is the number one problem. Instead of humanizing our day and instead of having passion toward our day and creating a mindset for ourselves of success, instead we just say, well, I got to get this stuff done in order to collect my paycheck. And if I want to close sales, which also gives me a commission check. And those are facts to an extent, right? But they should not be our main focus. They should surround our main focus as just what they are, facts, right? But also dehumanizing the process is a big piece of the puzzle for what I'm talking about, because even in the year 2020 compared to 1970, right? Like if we look at the difference, it being at 50 years now, right? Essentially, what I'm saying is that we still have the same branded mindset that we did in the 1970s, right? More than anything. It doesn't mean that people aren't actually utilizing social to some extent. It doesn't mean that people are, when it comes to outreach, are engaging in different methodologies to some extent, but it means that essentially the person that's delivering these things literally feels like they came from the past, right? It's like that concept for me. And I do agree with you from a leadership perspective, because I do believe that it is a lot of leaders. But let me tell you too, bro, as a millennial and being somebody that's in the streets and with other sales reps, I'll tell you that there are also men and women that are in their 30s, and I'm in groups with these people, and mostly just to watch and see how they talk on Facebook and on Reddit. There is a very toxic nature to sales right now when it comes to treating people like garbage, when it comes to not having any kind of inclusivity in their outlook at all. To me, it is a very dangerous place to be. And so it is leadership's fault. I agree with you on that. Like, how did we learn to be like this? We learned it from leadership to some extent, right? But we also have learned it from Hollywood. We watched The Wolf of Wall Street or The Boiler Room, or you watch Glenn Ross and think like, I want to be this guy. This guy's so cool. And people want to quote him all the time. And the A players and the elitists, like this guy's a billionaire, I'm going to be just like him. Look, that's a terrible mindset in general. Those billionaires didn't get there because they were ruthless as much as they were good business people, right? At the end of the day, a good business leader still especially the ones that are wealthy, still practice and understand what empathy is and what compassion is and how to put somebody else at the center of your outreach, because it's not about you and nobody cares in the first place. So that's why we lose so many salespeople as well out of our verticals, right? And they end up just going to a desk job and doing something else because they spend 2 years focusing so much on product and not people that they're so alone in those 24 months. They don't want to be there anymore. It's toxic to them. They're overweight now. They're having all these crazy health scares. They've had their first anxiety attack in their life at 23 years old or 43 years old, even at that, just because they got into sales. So there's all these stipulations that come with it too, right? But I think that should sum up, more or less like how I feel about it from the perspective of what we're doing wrong. Like, and we're not utilizing the tools that we have today. Look, we have augmented reality and virtual reality. We have the ability to be able to give people experiences, yet we still continue to write emails that are like, 90% of people do this wrong. Want to set up a meeting and learn how to do it right? Like, are you saying that I'm wrong in the way that I do my business? Like, screw off. I'm not going to respond to that stupid email in the first place. So I think it's common sense that we lack in the year 2020.
Yeah, I agree with you. Also, I was just sending out a message earlier to our internal team, and I was writing the message, and I went out to go find a GIF file so I can bring into the actual message. And, something that hit me, and I said, why don't I actually use more GIFs inside of my own messages with customers? Just that thought process, it hit me, and I was like, I'm doing it internally, and I know other people do it internally because I've been on the receiving side of it. So we should be thinking about, how am I going to add personalization, humanize the experience? I'm going to call this out because I'm a little ticked off about it, to be honest with you. So we had a rep who was from discover.org, and discover.org reached out to me. It was an SDR. And that SDR basically reached out and said, congrats on the new job. I'd like to add you to my professional connections on LinkedIn. All right. Now, I didn't have a new job. I responded with, new job. I don't have a new job. And he said, oh, I found you on a list of folks on LinkedIn who changed jobs within the last 90 days.
Wow.
Is it possible that you simply made a small change to your work history and it was reflected in that list? Are you or the Vengreso teams going to Dreamforce this year? Okay, hold on. Let's stop right there. First of all, you have no freaking clue who I am, because if you looked me up any moment, you would know that I'm one of the, I'm going to call myself one of the world's digital sales influencers who actually knows LinkedIn and teaches LinkedIn. Dude. And secondly, now I'm on some list as a buyer. I'm a CEO. You found me on a LinkedIn list, and then you asked me, is it possible I made a small change and it reflected? No. I added a new role as an advisor, and I wanted to really have him think this through, right? And so I was thinking about this, and I'm like, man, this guy just doesn't get it, right? Like you would have, at that point, you would have said, all right, I made a mistake, and I probably shouldn't have said that you're just on this list. And so I start calling through this list. Like, who says that? All right. So I said to him, no, I added a new role as an advisor. So I didn't get a new job. I was still the CEO, but I added a new role as an advisor. So I said, I highly recommend that you review each person's profile before messaging. In addition, this will help you very much on your outreach, which was basically a landing page to us and talking about our program. And I said, if you look at my profile, you'll see that I sit on the board of one of your competitors. Right. Okay. That should have been the clue. Oh, crap. Discover.org is reaching out to me, the CEO, to pitch me to use their product when I'm on the board of a competitor. Let's think through that for a second here, right? Now, this is the craziness about this. So first I was on some list. You just randomly sprayed and prayed. And then after you sprayed and prayed, I said, hey, what are you talking about? I didn't change jobs. I just created it as an advisor. I'm an advisor. Then you say to me, well, let's have a conversation anyways. But it's like, dude, did you not see who I work with? Like, that doesn't make sense. So then he says, here's the best part. Yeah, I saw that. I kind of just go for the super volume in the outreach, then personalize from there. Okay, let me repeat that for those of you listening in. Sales leaders, this is what he said. I kind of just go for super volume in the outreach. Then I personalize from there. Hence, messaging over 30,000 people who changed jobs in the last week. And then, sure, there's collateral damage, but who cares? I sourced a bunch of demos and closed one revenue.
Mind blown.
What in the freaking world have we done? What you just described is exactly what sales leaders are pushing to our sales teams. And to what your point of back in the 1970s, that's exactly the 1970s type behavior that I'm talking about, right? And the worst part, here's the worst part. As a sales influencer, I didn't call the dude out, nor did I call the company out, but I am doing it on my podcast. I told you it was discover.org. And I sent it to the CEO and said, hey man, I'd love to have a conversation about it to see if I can help you. He said, who is it? Who is the rep? I told him the rep's name. Do you know, after I reached back out to him and said, hey, I'd love to also have you on my podcast. Let's have a conversation and let me invite you to my podcast. Do you know that as the freaking CEO, where he saw his rep was telling me that he sprays and prays, sent it out to 30,000 people, that he supported it and didn't even say, you know what, I'm sorry for the inappropriate behavior. You're the freaking CEO of discover.org. Yeah, I hope you hear this. And you know exactly who I'm talking to right now. You're the CEO of discover.org, and really? You're going to do that? No. If I had received that as a leader, I'm bound to say, I'm super sorry. I'm super sorry. At least that. And then you move on, right? But we have forgotten about the humanization, the touch. I obviously got off on this and you got me all excited. We forgot about humanizing and personalizing relationships and people and this whole process. And to your point, the AI and the technology behind that, it's like we're hyperdrive on just like mass quantity to see whatever we can get.
Yeah, the outreach is interesting, right? Because the one that you were just talking about, it's disrespectful. There's a lot of arrogance in that messaging. It's combative. So when you say something to him, he had to come back and justify himself over and over again. And so what I see is what we're building in sales teams constantly, which is that we literally don't address their insecurities. And we feed into this notion of leadership that causes more and more low self-esteem for people to the point that they just don't even care anymore. Because the guy's literally just said to you, I don't care if there's collateral damage, because if I touch 30,000 people, I get one piece of revenue back from that 30,000. There's 1 million people on my list. So, I'll get what I get. It's just out of touch, dude. That's the problem.
And here's the other problem, though, as you think about this. Yeah, you may have gotten a bunch of appointments. Sure, maybe you did. But how many people did you piss off of the 30,000 because you didn't treat them right?
Right. Sales is about a reputation, right, dude?
Exactly. You hit the nail on the head, man. I think we've lost that. We've lost that, especially as sales leaders. How many sales leaders do you talk to, Dale, that are focusing in on how many cold calls you make, how many cold calls you make, how many cold calls you make, right?
100%.
Yeah, because that's what when I was growing up as a then telemarketer, now called SDR, when I was growing up in the sales world, that's exactly what I had to think about, right? We had to report that. But nowadays, to your point, we may be engaged with a buyer through social, through video, through email, through phone, through event, through a referral, wherever the omni-channel might exist. And my perspective is, as a leader, I don't care how many phone calls you made. What I care about is how many conversations did you have?
Yes. Great point, dude.
Because that's really the end result, right? The end result is get to the conversation. And how you got there is immaterial. Thoughts?
Yeah, 100% on board with that. I think that so many people focus too much on the wrong thing inside of the activity or the action, right? I think another good one is when people talk about personalizing something in their outreach, right? So now we've got this, it's like a cliche to say that now, right? Like personalize your outreach. It's literally what it's become, but it's super important to the extent of actually doing it, right? Where people, they kind of blanket the outreach. And so the personalization goes away to some capacity, but the personalization side isn't about the human on the other end going to Stanford University. It's about the relevance that you bring to the conversation to begin with. That's how you create something that is much more personalized. It's about them connecting with you on the other line, but more than it is about you being creepy and stalking them and finding out that they have 3 kids and one of them goes to this high school. And it's like, okay, how about I call the cops and just get a restraining order now? I think that's probably the best thing to do. Salespeople are notoriously stalkerish when they're out personalizing information or outreach to people, right? And I think it goes to the point of what you were just talking about when it comes to the results themselves. Just because we're personalizing it doesn't mean we're going to get a result in the first place. Just because we make 150 dials doesn't mean we're going to get a result. We're going to get something out of these things, but we're not going to get what's desired, right? And we can sit around and we can all huckle and chuckle and give each other MHJs about whether or not we actually got something done today, right? But to me, it's bull crap, and nobody's calling it out. And the thing is that that's what personal growth is all about. To sit in a room with a bunch of people that are just rubbing your shoulders and high-fiving you because you got an appointment that cancels next week and never takes another appointment back with you again in the first place is stupid. It doesn't help the rep. It doesn't help the company. It doesn't help the narrative of what we're trying to take sales to in the future, now, in the present, right?
Exactly. I totally agree with you. Now, I want to ask you a question because we spent some time on this. Obviously, so I'm very passionate about this, and so are you, about what we're doing wrong. And I want to get to talking about, well, how can reps find more net new business?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of different ways that reps can create relevance in their outreach for themselves to be able to find net new business. And also there's a lot more avenues these days. It's not the phone book anymore like it used to. I don't even know if that thing exists in the first place anymore, but it stems from...
I still get one. I still get a yellow pages
that's
or
nuts.
white pages.
that's nuts. So, but I think personally it stems from what it is the rep chooses when it comes to the quality that they're looking for in the first place. So if the rep is going to download a list from an online resource, vet the resource. Make sure that the list is something worthwhile for you, right? If the rep is going to use the CRM in an existing territory that's been created, they need to understand that maybe it was 10 years ago that people put that information in the CRM in the first place. Like, we need to understand the relevance of the way that we're looking for net new business to begin with. I think is the first thing that reps need to focus on. But the second is that they don't need to be doing the same old traditional model of cold calling when it comes down to the basics of it, right? They don't need to go and just knock on doors and hand a business card, 30 different times and pretend that somehow that's outreach, right? There needs to be conversations that create impact in those moments. There needs to be an experience for the person that they're calling on in the first place. I know people can't see it, but I've got a whole campaign. I call it the letter campaign, and there's actually 4 different letters, but I'm showing Mario an envelope that has a letter inside of it that says, on the front of the envelope, it says "Coaster for you," and we've designed a little coffee stain on it. And this is something I used as a rep when I was selling copy machines, and now I'm bringing it to the masses for other people to use, right? It's the concept of interruptions inside of the marketplace, where from 8 to 5, the people that you're calling on and why your cold calls and your emails and your phone calls are so ineffective in the first place is because there are 30 other salespeople in different verticals calling on the same people that you are. And so the receptionist has 2 jobs. The first job is to make sure that anything worthwhile for people inside of the business, that it gets passed along. And the second job is to stop all salespeople. That's pretty much it. Obviously, I'm being a little sarcastic because they have other things that they have to do. To some degree, in most organizations, I believe they have their finger on the pulse of the entire organization, so they can become your best ally. But if you have this mindset of these people get quote unquote bothered all the time by salespeople because that's their perception of it, and you give them the Disney experience when you walk in the front door, they're going to remember you differently. So it's your dress code. It's the way that you present yourself, your tonality. It's being super self-aware, right? But also situationally aware. When you're going to a specific vertical to call on them, whether it's in person, over the phone, through an email, through a video, through LinkedIn, whatever that looks like, you can't blanket that outreach. And furthermore, you've got to start using interrupt marketing tactics. The idea is that, again, in 2020, there's a lot of noise. And so you can be a part of the noise, which is static, or you can make your own noise over in this corner that people will be attracted to. And the idea here, though, is not that this is somehow some kind of silver bullet or some kind of new idea that nobody's ever thought of. This is the concept of stepping out of your comfort zone and going toward things that are unknown that you fear as a rep. Because a lot of times people say, I just don't know that I could do that. I hate it when people say that, quite frankly. And there are a lot of things that I've done in my sales career that are just nuts, right? Like Stu Heineck is one of my proverbial mentors. When I was a kid, I read his first book and I thought, this is genius stuff. But instead of copy pasting everything out of it, I did my own thing. Right? One of the first things I ever did that was inspired by him from the perspective of doing it big, because I'd been doing, coffee stain letters and pre-burnt letters and the whole campaign for quite some time. But before I read his book, but I actually created cardboard cutouts of myself, because that's a Dale thing to do, right? And like people that know who I am are not surprised by that whatsoever, right? But it was a cardboard cutout of me pulling a sword from a copy machine, right? And it was like a golden copier, and there was a whole experience. There was a note that was attached to it. I mean, it was fun. There was a QR code inside of the note that people would scan. And the funny part about that is that was like 2011, 2012, that time frame, right? And nowadays, though, people think that a QR code is completely outdated. And what's funny is like back then, nobody scanned them. I mean, I would pass out like 20 of those things and maybe one person would. But I'll tell you this, that I found my tribe by doing these things. I didn't find prospects or customers, dude. I found my tribe. I found my people. I found those that were willing to give me a chance and to invest back into me as well, too. So there was no negotiating. It was, hey, Dale, what's a fair price? We trust you, right? And then it was up to me, my integrity, my ethics, my morals to be able to deliver for those people. And when you spend as many years as I did in the copier industry with one company, at the end of my career, I need a caveat here, right? I spent 1.5 years with another firm, but for my entire existence of the 13 years outside of that, I was with one company. And the only way to do that successfully in the copier world is to build a loyal fan base. Yeah, and that's what I did.
Yeah. Funny you mentioned Stu. He actually was on the podcast here, and it's actually our second most listened to podcast in over 100 and almost 140 shows. So How to Get a Meeting with Anyone was the latest podcast with him. And it was a really good one. And he had some really great ways. And when actually people can't see me, me and Dale are looking at each other right now. But when Dale held up hold up that envelope again one more time, Dale. So from the outside, this says coaster for you. And it looks like it was painted on. I'm sure it's probably been stamped on or printed on. And it looks like a coffee spill. If I'm not mistaken, is it a coffee spill?
Yeah, it's like a coffee stain.
And then on the backside it says Kindle inside, or is that the letter?
This is the second one, actually.
Oh, Kindle inside. Okay, so the idea is get it to open. What's the third one you got?
So I've got 5 total, but I got 2 I can show you. But this is the inside of the coffee stain. So
okay, so he's holding up a letter, and the letter has coffee on it.
And then this is the Kindle one. So it's got burn marks all over it. Looks like it's been pre-burnt. And the idea with the messaging in these is this. Like, I'll go ahead and give a little bit of the secret away here. And if anybody wants these packages, we sell them online for a very small cost. We've done all the graphic art and everything for these. So reps have zero legwork. They just can download it and start using it, because we want to empower the next generation of salespeople to be the best generation of salespeople. But the messaging in here is simple, dude. It's the concept of when you start reading, first of all, I capture your attention immediately. No beating around the bush. It straight up says, you're probably wondering why. And it talks about the theme of the letter. And then we have just really good copy in here. Like, I'm not being biased at all, right? I had people help me with this stuff back in the day in the first place, right? But so this isn't just my idea. This is a conglomeration back when I first started my branding in 2010 and 2009, right? But the idea is that it speaks to you through pain. It talks about like, look, everything that comes across your desk that's sales and marketing is garbage. Right. And so each one is themed toward that garbage concept. Right. So the pre-burnt one is literally me telling you, Mario, that I pre-burnt this letter so you can light it on fire and cook some marshmallows over it later, when you're done with it. With a purpose between my outreach and our relationship. And people read that and they do exactly what you just did, is they laugh. Now, is it a silver bullet? No, that's why there's 5 letters, right? Because it's a cadence and it's about building rapport and credibility over time, and not looking at sales anymore from an instant gratification standpoint, but understanding that it has to be earned. It cannot be bought, right? And if we have that mindset and mentality, we will win the long game. And people will all be going, what the hell did you do?
Yeah. Now, that's a letter cadence that you're physically sending out to somebody. How is that working in this very virtualized environment where 40% of a lot of companies are getting rid of office space and letting people work from home?
Yeah. So what's interesting about it is that what we find, at least, so SDRs typically mail it. Account executives that are physically in a territory deliver them, right? And so there's a couple ways to do it from that perspective, right? And so we include in the package entire mindset scripts and everything you need to know on making sure that you can get these out in the appropriate way. But what we find is that 90% of the recipients, because it's an experience, they're not used to it. Everything's digital, like you said. It takes them back to, in most cases, because of the age of typical buyers inside of verticals, is it takes them back to when they were a kid. And mom used to write them a handwritten note, or grandma would bring them a birthday card, right? And they go back to this place of this physical thing that gives them this experience, and it's nostalgic to an extent because everything is so digitized these days. But what's funny about what you say is that we actually also have a digital version of one of the letters. So when you have people that are working remote and you can't get a hold of them, we have a cadence inside of this whole thing that has a digital version of the letter. And then the other side of it is that we have video that we use as well too to deliver these, or augmented reality as well too, that somebody can pop up and literally be inside of the letter campaign in a way that just blows their freaking mind in the first place. Because again, this is about Disney for sales. Like, that's what the sales rebellion is more than anything. We definitely have our core values, the things that we believe in that separate us from the pack. But the big idea being that, like, I grew up in this concept of creativity being the most important thing when it comes to getting somebody's attention, because again, there's a lot of noise, right? And are you going to be a part of it? Or are you going to set yourself apart from it? That's the concept here. And so if somebody, even with these campaigns, people have said to me over time now, because we've sold a lot at this point, right? And they're like, well, what happens when everybody's using it? And I say, don't worry, I have 99 more versions of this type of interrupt marketing. I just haven't told you about it yet.
You actually have these as packages that you sell to sales organizations to use.
Correct. Yeah.
Very cool.
One of the things we offer is we customize these. So if somebody picks a package where we just put together these pieces for them, we have dozens of them that we can choose from. We kind of go over them with the prospect, and then we do the graphic art. We do everything for the prospect, based on the package, and we load their salespeople up. And then the only training we do in those packages is basically just getting their heads right when it comes to the prospecting side of it. And then if they want to bring us on further, cool. But this particular campaign, we give this to the masses. Anyone and everyone can buy this. And it will always be that way with this particular campaign, no matter what, because we believe that sales reps deserve better when it comes to what they're using for outreach and the cadence that they have it in place. Well, and I believe the big piece of this that is a puzzle piece in the grand scheme is that this ties in very well with digitizing your outreach in general. So sending someone this and then a voice note over LinkedIn saying, hey, did you get my letter? Is very effective, and again, like, this isn't just me saying things that I think work. This is from experience and using it in my own walk. So that's a big piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. I love that idea. We spent a lot of time on some really good, actually, feedback, and you brought to my mind some of the things I was hearing about with Stu on how to get a meeting with anyone, his new book, and some of the things that you're doing is pretty brilliant. I mean, that's pretty awesome. I'm just upset that I didn't think about it. And I'm sitting here, I'm like, man, that would have been great to run this part as part of our campaign, and this is part of the campaign, right? But one thing that you and I are pretty in line with, and I'm going to totally switch gears here, because I believe that sales is hard. Sales is hard. Sales is fun. No doubt about it. Sales is creative. You can become a smarketer. That is a sales and marketer all in one. You can, to your point, you can create all kinds of really cool stuff to be able to get into people's offices, to be able to build relationships. That's that marketing aspect. So if I want to be a marketer and make extra money or more money, I'm going to be a smarketer, which is a salesperson in today's selling age, right? But something else that is challenged is it's a grind. It's a grind. Sales is a grind, man. It's not for the faint of heart. In fact, I think we're seeing the average length of tenure of a CSO is, I think it was 18 months I saw, or was it 22 months? One of the two.
Yeah, it's one of those, yeah.
18 to 22 months. Let's just say it's between that, right? That's a short tenure. That's a short life. And it's not because you're getting promoted, right? In most cases, I mean, maybe a few of them are, but a lot of cases where they're churning through sales leaders because of the challenge with the salespeople. Talk a little bit about mental health. Why do you believe mental health is so important in sales?
Because I think it ties back into what you just said, in that if we spend 2 years grinding in something that is such a difficult vertical to begin with, 2 years is a long time to just be constantly berated, belittled, and the toxification behind those 2 years that comes with the territory is something that's long lasting, and it affects you mentally, physically, and spiritually. Those are the three places that it starts. I've heard the stories, I've seen things in my own walk as well too, that are in some cases indescribable when it comes down to the amount of pain and the amount of suffering that salespeople go through in some cases. The buyer doesn't understand what the salesperson has gone through either. We have zero empathy these days inside of society when it comes to the way that we look at business to business in general. When someone comes in the front door and they have a suit and a tie and they're trying to sell something, it's like, this person sucks. And the fact that we think that, yet we don't understand that they're widowed or they're a single dad or, they just lost a family member to cancer back at home and they're just trying to make a living. And this is what they know they're good at. And this is what they're passionate about. We don't think about these things. And because of that, as a society, we create a very dark world inside of the sales realm. Personally, for me, my struggle, I am somebody that has struggled with depression my entire life. And so sales exemplified that depression, right? It literally took it to the next level. And when I was 15, before I was even in sales, I actually tried to commit suicide. And a lot of people don't know that about me either, dude. And it's because, look, I'm a bright, happy-go-lucky, extroverted dude. But there's a darkness that lives in me that is undeniable when it comes to the fact that it's present and it's always there. And at 25, as an A player and as an elite salesperson, I got to that place again. As an adult, as a man, as a husband, as a believer, as somebody that is on another level from being 15 years old and just lost and confused and sad, right? And it all stemmed back to the amount of hours, 100-hour-a-week work weeks for months at a time, because I was making great money and I was pushing myself and trying to motivate myself into success. But really what I was doing was digging a grave the entire time. And I was so lost and blind to it because the sales society and the people around me, not necessarily my leaders, but because I had two great leaders in my father and a man named Rich Johnson, who is one of my mentors and best friends. But it was more or less the culture that's created around sales that was causing me to just kind of blindly continue to dig that grave, and not just dig it, bro, but build my casket. I'm getting a little graphic here, but the point of saying that is that how many people are listening right now that aren't sleeping in the same bed as their husband or their wife? How many people are listening right now that head down to the bar after work before they go home because they need a shot of whiskey, to feel a little relaxed because they've had a long day? These are extremely dark places that feel normalized to us as human beings. But really what it is it's us disconnecting from the truth in those moments. And again, instead of creating a place that's safe for us, we're really just going 6 feet under. And that's the bottom line behind it.
So what do you suggest people do?
Personally, I suggest we talk about it more. That's the first thing that I suggest, is that we admit our mistakes, we admit our faults, we admit defeats. And you talked about leaders. Dude, leaders have to seriously check themselves. And I've been around them, not just around them from the perspective of being in their circles, but worked for them. This idea of thinking that somehow talking about people a certain way because you don't like their work ethic or you don't like the way they dress today, or even getting upset about somebody for doing something minute, right, that doesn't really have a whole lot of meaning, but it's this whole concept of cracking the whip, make sure we've got a really good workforce here, right? Make sure we're super tight, we're not making mistakes. Every little thing you do when someone loses the deal, and you don't encourage them in those moments and say, how are we going to get better from this? But instead you say, well, you're not going to hit your number then, so you better go out and find some more business, right? There is nothing constructive about that, and it continues to dig people down these holes. I'll tell you right now that 90% of the individual contributors listening, I believe this number to be true because of the people that I've talked to in my own walk and the way that I've tallied them, because they're on a prayer list for me, right? Because I care. Right. But I'll tell you that 90% of the people that I talk to, and I believe it's where the sales world works, hold a grudge against their boss and are not happy working underneath them to some capacity. Even if they tell you and me, oh, they're the best person I've ever worked for, this and that, you get a beer into them, it's a whole different story, dude. And I've lived it with them in some cases, and in other cases, I've sat and listened for hours, to some of the atrocious things that they've had to put up with. So for me, it's about talking about these things. Cynthia Barnes is a good example of talking about things that are extremely important in the sales world today. I believe that she's leading a movement in her own right with the way that we treat women as men in the workplace, not buyers, not sellers, even though I know she focuses on that side of it. But I believe she's talking about a human condition, just like we're We're talking about a human condition right now. And the more that leaders can step out of their comfort zone, be vulnerable, talk about their experiences, their faults, their failures, and get other people to realize that, listen, it's okay if this has happened to you, but we have to move past it. We, as a unit, as a community, we won't have change. So talking about it is the number one piece to providing it.
Oh, sounds good, man. I appreciate that particular perspective. And for those of you who don't know who Cynthia Barnes is, she's actually the CEO and founder of NAWSP, the National Association of Women Sales Professionals, of which I'm also on the advisory board for that NAWSP, and love Cynthia to death. So if people want to connect with you, what's the easiest way? Is it to tweet at you? Is it to connect with you on LinkedIn? Or what's the best way to be able to get a hold of you?
On the social realm, LinkedIn is the number one. I have the biggest following there, so I spend the most time there. But you can find me on Twitter at Sales Rebellion. You can find me on Instagram at Sales Rebellion, Facebook, Sales Rebellion Copier Warrior on Facebook. And if you go to LinkedIn, it's just linkedin.com/in/Copier Warrior is how you find me. You can find the Sales Rebellion on there too. You can check out our website, salesrebellion.com. But I'll tell you that the best way to find me is to find my cell phone. My cell phone number exists on the internet. A lot of people are afraid to do that, but I am not, because I'll tell you right now, Mario, that the number one thing for me in my walk is to serve other people. And if you really need to get a hold of me that badly, you want to talk about things that we've discussed today, you want to be better as a human, as a father, as a person, as a leader, hit me up and just ask me if I can help you to some capacity. I'll take 10 minutes out of my day, even if I'm right in the middle of something, if you genuinely go through the hoops to find my cell phone. So good luck, everybody.
And if you are having trouble with trying to find his phone number, tools like Seamless.ai and others could easily find that phone number for you. So
definitely on there.
That's a shameless plug for another company that I'm on the advisory board for and that invest in. But we actually use the product as well. So listen, Dale, it's been great having you. I have one final question for you, and that is your all-time favorite movie. What is it?
Star Wars.
Which one?
I'll tell you that my favorite. No, I like the whole series for sure, definitely, right? Even the prequels. But I'll tell you, my favorite movie, even though I believe that The Empire Strikes Back is the best cinematic film ever made, my favorite of them all is Return of the Jedi.
Return of the Jedi. There you have it.
I want to be Luke Skywalker, bro.
And you're on your way with the Sales Rebellion, my young Padawan. I love it. Well, there you have it, Mr. Dale Dupree joining us on the Modern Selling Podcast. All of you listening in right now, the show ain't over. Listen to this very important message right now. Thanks for listening to the Modern Selling Podcast. Please do me a huge favor and give the Modern Selling Podcast a rating and review on iTunes. I would appreciate it. Also, if you want to easily find our show, just go to themodernsellingpodcast.com. Hey, since you'll be on our site, be sure to check out our Modern Marketing Engine podcast hosted by my co-founder and CMO, Bernie Borges. Thanks for listening in, and until the next episode, good selling.